the crimson stain spreading across her torn dress, was the first thing Gideon Zimmerman noticed when he found the woman collapsed beneath the cottonwood tree that marked the eastern boundary of his Montana ranch. The summer of 1876 had been particularly harsh, with the July heat bearing down on the territory like a blacksmith's forge. Gideon had ridden out to check the fence line near the creek when he spotted what he initially thought was a pile of discarded clothing. As he drew closer on his chestnut mare, the clothing moved, and he realized with a jolt that it was a woman, barely conscious and bleeding. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the dry earth with a soft thud. Up close, he could see she was young, perhaps mid-20s, with dark hair matted against her pale face. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, and a nasty gash on her left shoulder continued to seep blood through the torn fabric of her dress. "Madam," Gideon said softly, kneeling beside her. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing green eyes clouded with pain and confusion. She tried to speak, but only a weak moan escaped her cracked lips. Gideon did not hesitate. He had been alone on this ranch for 3 years now, ever since Caroline had died of scarlet fever, and in that time he had learned to make quick decisions without second-guessing himself. This woman needed help, and she needed it now. He carefully gathered her into his arms, surprised at how light she felt, as though she had not eaten properly in days. She whimpered as he lifted her, and guilt twisted in his chest at causing her more pain. "I know it hurts," he murmured, carrying her to his horse, "but I am going to help you." Getting her onto the mare while she was unconscious proved difficult, but Gideon managed it with a combination of strength and determination. He mounted behind her, holding her secure against his chest as he urged the horse into a steady canter toward his cabin. The ride took nearly 20 minutes, during which the woman drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling words he could not quite make out. His cabin sat in a small valley surrounded by rolling hills covered in prairie grass. It was a modest structure, built from logs he had cut himself when he first claimed this land 5 years ago. Caroline had helped him build it, her laughter ringing out across the valley as they worked side by side. The memory still stung, even after all this time. Gideon pushed the thought away as he reached the cabin. He carefully dismounted, then gently pulled the woman down into his arms again. She was completely unconscious now, her head lolling against his shoulder. He kicked open the cabin door and carried her inside, laying her on his bed, the only real bed in the place. The cabin was clean but sparse. A wooden table and 2 chairs occupied one corner, a stone fireplace dominated another wall, and various supplies and equipment hung from hooks or sat on shelves. Gideon immediately went to work, grabbing clean cloth and water from the barrel near the door. He hesitated for only a moment before carefully cutting away the torn portion of her dress to expose the wound. The gash was deep but clean, likely from a blade rather than a bullet. That was fortunate. He had dug out enough bullets in his time to know that this would be easier to treat. Still, she had lost a significant amount of blood, and infection was always a risk. Gideon cleaned the wound with steady hands, his face set in concentration. He had learned basic medicine during the war, patching up soldiers on both sides when circumstances demanded it. Those skills had served him well on the ranch, where the nearest doctor was a day's ride away in the small settlement of Pine Ridge. As he worked, he studied her face. She was beautiful, even pale and injured. Her features were delicate but strong, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw. Dark lashes rested against her cheeks, and her lips, though chapped, were full and well-shaped. Gideon felt an unexpected flutter in his chest and immediately pushed it down. This woman needed medical attention, not his foolish heart getting involved. He stitched the wound with careful precision, using thread and a needle he kept for just such purposes. The woman remained unconscious throughout, which he counted as a blessing. Once the stitching was complete, he bandaged her shoulder and covered her with a clean blanket. Then came the waiting. Gideon pulled a chair close to the bed and settled in, watching her breathe. The steady rise and fall of her chest reassured him that she was stable, at least for now. As the afternoon light faded through the cabin's single window, he found his thoughts drifting to Caroline. They had been married for only 2 years when the fever took her. 2 years of happiness, of building this ranch together, of planning for children and a future. He had been in town buying supplies when she fell ill. By the time he returned 3 days later, she was already burning with fever. She died in his arms 2 days after that, begging him to forgive her for leaving him alone. Gideon had not cried at her funeral. He had not cried since. Instead, he had thrown himself into the work of the ranch, rising before dawn and collapsing into exhausted sleep each night. The loneliness had become a constant companion, as familiar as his own shadow. He told himself he preferred it that way. The woman stirred, pulling him from his dark thoughts. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. She looked around the cabin, then at him, and panic immediately flooded her features. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You are safe," Gideon said gently, remaining seated so as not to frighten her further. "I am Gideon Zimmerman. I found you injured on my property and brought you here to help. You have been unconscious for several hours." She tried to sit up, then gasped in pain as the movement pulled at her stitches. "Do not move too quickly," Gideon cautioned. "You had a deep wound on your shoulder. I cleaned and stitched it, but you need to rest." The woman's hand went to her bandaged shoulder, her fingers trembling as they explored the dressing. Tears welled in her eyes, and she bit her lip, clearly fighting to maintain her composure. "I am Julia Emerson," she said finally. "I was traveling to Pine Ridge when I was attacked." "Attacked by whom?" Julia closed her eyes, and a single tear escaped down her cheek. "3 men. They stopped the stage I was on about 10 miles back. The driver tried to resist, and they shot him. The other passengers gave them their valuables without trouble, but when they tried to take my mother's locket, I fought back. One of them cut me with his knife and left me for dead in the brush." Anger surged through Gideon at the thought of men attacking a stagecoach and hurting an innocent woman. "Your locket, did they take it?" Julia's hand went to her neck and her face crumpled. "Yes." "I am sorry," Gideon said, meaning it, "but you are alive, and that is what matters most." "Did you see which direction they went?" "North, I think, but I cannot be certain. After they cut me, everything became confused. I remember stumbling away from the road, thinking only that I needed to hide in case they came back. Then nothing until I woke here." Gideon nodded. "You walked quite a distance before you collapsed. That took considerable strength." "Or considerable foolishness," Julia said with a weak attempt at a smile. "I may have gotten myself further from help. Perhaps, but you found help eventually. That is what matters." Julia studied him with those striking green eyes, and Gideon felt that flutter in his chest again. He stood abruptly, needing to put some distance between them. "You must be thirsty," he said, moving to the water barrel, "and hungry if you can manage food." "Water would be wonderful," Julia said gratefully. Gideon poured a cup and brought it to her, helping her sit up enough to drink without choking. She drank deeply, then sank back against the pillow with a sigh of relief. "Thank you," she said. "You have been very kind." "Any decent person would have done the same." "Not in my experience," Julia said quietly, "but I am grateful nonetheless." Gideon felt his face warm at her words. He was not accustomed to gratitude or praise. Since Caroline's death, His interactions with other people had been minimal and purely practical. "I will prepare some broth," he said, retreating to the relative safety of his cooking area. "You need to regain your strength." As he worked, he was acutely aware of Julia watching him from the bed. It made him self-conscious in a way he had not felt in years. He realized with some embarrassment that the cabin was not set up for female company. His spare clothes hung from pegs on the wall, his shaving equipment sat on a shelf in plain view, and he had only one bed. "Where will you sleep?" Julia asked as though reading his thoughts. "I have blankets," Gideon said. "I will make a pallet by the fire. I cannot take your bed. You are injured and need proper rest. I will hear no argument about it." Julia fell silent, but he could feel her continued gaze on him. The broth was simple, made from beef bones and vegetables he had been preparing for his own supper. He brought her a bowl and once again helped her sit up to eat. Her hands shook as she held the spoon, but she managed several sips before exhaustion overtook her. "That is enough for now," Gideon said, taking the bowl. "You should sleep." "Will you tell me about yourself?" Julia asked, settling back against the pillows. "It would ease my mind to know more about my rescuer." Gideon hesitated. He was not accustomed to talking about himself. But something in Julia's eyes, a vulnerability mixed with genuine interest, made him want to open up. "There is not much to tell," he began, returning to his chair. "I came to Montana 5 years ago with my wife to start a ranch. We built this cabin and claimed this land. 2 years later, she died of scarlet fever. I have been working the ranch alone since then." "I am so sorry for your loss," Julia said softly. "That must have been terribly difficult." "It was." The words came out more honest than he intended. "It still is, if I am being truthful." "How long has it been?" 3 years. "And you have been alone all that time?" "Yes." Julia was quiet for a moment. "That is a long time to carry grief by yourself." Gideon did not know how to respond to that. No one had spoken to him so directly about Caroline in all the time since her death. The few neighbors he had kept their distance, respecting what they assumed was his desire for solitude. In truth, he had desired exactly that, at least at first. But lately, the loneliness had begun to feel less like protection and more like a prison. "What brought you to Montana?" he asked, changing the subject. Julia's expression grew troubled. "I was coming to start a new life. After my parents died last year, I had nothing keeping me in Ohio. I saw an advertisement for a teaching position in Pine Ridge and thought it would be a chance to begin again somewhere fresh." "A teacher," Gideon said. "Pine Ridge will be fortunate to have you." "If I ever make it there," Julia said with a rueful smile. "At this rate, the school year will begin without me." "When does it start?" "In 6 weeks." "That gives you plenty of time to heal," Gideon assured her. "The wound was clean. If we keep it that way and you rest properly, you should be well enough to travel within a few weeks." "A few weeks?" Julia looked alarmed. "I cannot impose on you for that long. You have little choice. The nearest doctor is in Pine Ridge, and you are in no condition to travel there now. Besides, those men who attacked you may still be in the area. Better to wait until you are stronger." Julia bit her lip, clearly troubled by the situation. "I have no way to repay your kindness." "I am not asking for repayment. Still, I feel I should contribute something. Perhaps I could help with cooking or mending while I recover." Gideon wanted to refuse, to tell her she needed only to focus on healing. But he saw the pride in her eyes and understood that she needed to feel useful. "We will see how you feel in a few days. For now, you need rest." Julia nodded, her eyelids already drooping. Within minutes, she was asleep again, her breathing deep and even. Gideon sat watching her for a long while, feeling something stir inside him that he had thought long dead. The days that followed settled into a careful routine. Each morning, Gideon woke before dawn and tended to his horses and the few cattle he kept near the cabin. He would return to find Julia awake, and he would help her sit up, change her bandages, and bring her breakfast. She protested his help at first, insisting she could manage on her own, but her weakness made such protests futile. On the third day, Julia was strong enough to sit up on her own and eat without assistance. Gideon felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Relief because it meant she was healing well, disappointment because it meant he had less excuse to be close to her. "I am feeling much better," Julia announced that morning, her color finally returning to normal. "I think I could perhaps help with some small tasks today." Gideon frowned. "You should not push yourself. I have been lying in bed for 3 days. If I do not move soon, I will go mad." She paused, then added with a teasing smile, "Unless you enjoy having a useless invalid occupying your bed." The comment made Gideon's ears burn, and he turned away to hide his reaction. "You are hardly useless, but if you insist on helping, you may shell the peas I picked yesterday. Nothing too strenuous." Julia's smile widened, clearly pleased to have won this small victory. Gideon brought her the peas and a bowl, then tried to focus on his own work. But he found his attention continually drawn back to her, watching the way sunlight from the window caught in her dark hair, the graceful movements of her hands as she worked, the soft humming that escaped her lips. "Tell me more about your wife," Julia said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "What was she like?" The question caught Gideon off guard. He had spent 3 years avoiding conversations about Caroline, and now here was this woman asking about her as casually as one might ask about the weather. "Why do you want to know?" he asked, his tone perhaps sharper than intended. Julia looked up, unfazed by his reaction. "Because she was clearly important to you, and because I think you need to talk about her. You carry your grief like a stone around your neck, weighing you down with every step." Her perceptiveness startled him. "You deduce all this after only 3 days." "I have had little to do but observe," Julia said gently. "And I recognize grief when I see it. I have carried my own since my parents died." Gideon sat down at the table, suddenly weary. Her name was Caroline. She was strong and brave and never afraid of hard work. She loved this land as much as I did. We were building something together, a future. And then she was gone, and all the plans we made meant nothing. "They were not meaningless," Julia said firmly. "She helped you build this ranch. That has meaning. The life you shared, even if it was too short, that had meaning. Do not dishonor her memory by pretending otherwise." Gideon felt his throat tighten. "I am not dishonoring her memory. Are you not? By shutting yourself away, by refusing to live, by turning this ranch into a monument to grief rather than a home. Is that what she would have wanted for you?" Anger flared in Gideon's chest, hot and sharp. "You know nothing about what she would have wanted." "You are right," Julia said calmly. "But I know what I would want if I were in her place. I would want the man I love to live, truly live, not merely exist in the shadow of my death." Gideon stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You overstep." "Perhaps," Julia acknowledged, "but someone needs to say it." "You saved my life, Gideon. Let me return the favor by telling you a truth you need to hear." He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that she did not understand, but the words stuck in his throat because some part of him knew she was right. He had been merely existing, going through the motions of life without truly living. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. "I need to check the fence line," he said gruffly, grabbing his hat and heading for the door. "Gideon," Julia called after him. When he paused, she said softly, "I am sorry if I hurt you. That was not my intention." He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak, and left the cabin. Gideon spent the rest of the morning riding the perimeter of his property, ostensibly checking fences but really just needing space to think. Julia's words had cut through his carefully constructed defenses, exposing wounds he had thought healed but were merely scabbed over. Caroline would have liked Julia, he realized. They shared the same forthright nature, the same refusal to dance around difficult truths. Caroline had never let him wallow in self-pity either, always pushing him to be better, to do more. In that way, Julia's presence felt both like a betrayal of Caroline's memory and a continuation of it. By the time he returned to the cabin, the sun was high overhead and his stomach was reminding him he had skipped breakfast. He found Julia still in bed, the bowl of shelled peas neatly filled beside her. She looked up as he entered, worry clear in her eyes. "I apologize," she said immediately. "I had no right to speak to you that way." Gideon removed his hat and hung it on its peg. "No, you were right. I have been hiding from life. Caroline would have hated seeing me this way." Relief flooded Julia's face. "I only said it because I care. You have shown me such kindness, and I hate to see you suffering when you do not have to." "I am not sure I know how to stop," Gideon admitted, surprised at his own honesty. "Perhaps we can help each other figure it out," Julia suggested. "I am trying to start over myself. We could both use a friend in that endeavor." A friend. The word felt foreign yet appealing. Gideon realized he had not had a real friend since Caroline died. "I would like that." Julia's smile lit up her whole face, and Gideon felt his heart skip a beat. He busied himself with preparing lunch to hide his reaction, but he was acutely aware of her continued presence. The way she hummed softly as she watched him work, the occasional question she asked about his cooking methods or his ranch. Over the following days, their friendship deepened. Julia grew stronger each day, graduating from sitting in bed to sitting at the table, then to taking short walks around the cabin. Gideon found himself looking forward to their conversations, the way Julia challenged his thinking and made him laugh with her wry observations about life. She told him about growing up in Ohio, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a store owner. Her childhood had been happy but unremarkable, filled with books and learning and the quiet rhythms of small-town life. Her parents' deaths in a railway accident had shattered that peace, leaving her adrift and alone. "I thought coming west would be an adventure," Julia said one evening as they sat outside the cabin, watching the sun set over the hills. "A chance to be brave and independent. Instead, I nearly got myself killed within days of arriving." "But you survived," Gideon pointed out. "That took courage, or stubbornness. I am not always sure there is a difference." Gideon laughed, the sound surprising them both. He could not remember the last time he had genuinely laughed. Julia's eyes sparkled with delight at the sound. "You should do that more often," she said. "Laugh, I mean. It suits you." "I have not had much to laugh about in recent years." "Then we shall have to change that." As the second week of Julia's stay began, Gideon found himself increasingly aware of her in ways that had nothing to do with her injury. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. The soft sound of her breathing in the night from across the cabin. The grace of her movements as she moved about, growing steadier each day. He tried to push these feelings down, telling himself it was too soon, that he was betraying Caroline's memory. But Julia's earlier words haunted him. Caroline would want him to live. Would she want him to be happy again? Could he allow himself that possibility? The question became more pressing when, 2 weeks after finding Julia, Gideon realized he was falling in love with her. It hit him one morning as he watched her hanging laundry on the line he had strung up outside the cabin. She had insisted on helping with chores despite her shoulder still healing, and he had finally relented. The morning sun caught in her hair, turning it golden at the edges, and she was humming again, that soft melody that had become so familiar. She looked up and caught him watching. "What is it?" "Nothing," Gideon said quickly, feeling his face heat. "I was just thinking you look well. Your shoulder must be healing nicely." "It is, thanks to you." Julia walked over to him, close enough that he could smell the clean scent of soap and sunshine on her skin. "I have been thinking, Gideon. I am well enough now to make the journey to Pine Ridge. You have been more than generous with your hospitality, but I should not impose any longer." The words hit Gideon like a physical blow. He was not ready for her to leave. The cabin would feel empty without her. His life would return to the colorless existence it had been before she arrived. "But what right did he have to ask her to stay?" "If that is what you wish," he said carefully. "But there is no rush. The school year does not start for several more weeks." Julia studied his face, her expression unreadable. "Is that the only reason you want me to stay? Because there is no rush." The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. Gideon knew this was a moment of truth, a chance to either retreat back into his safe loneliness or step forward into something new and terrifying. "No," he said quietly. "I want you to stay because I have come to care for you. Because these past weeks with you here have been the first time I have felt truly alive since Caroline died. Because the thought of you leaving makes my chest ache in a way I did not think possible anymore." Julia's eyes widened, and for a terrible moment, Gideon thought he had made a mistake, revealed too much too soon. Then she smiled, a brilliant, joyful expression that made his heart soar. "I was hoping you would say that," she said softly, "because I feel the same way. You saved my life, Gideon, but you have done more than that. You have shown me kindness and honesty and strength. You have made me feel safe and valued. I do not want to leave either." "Truly." Gideon hardly dared believe it. "Truly." Julia reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm against his skin. "But I need to know something first. Can you let go of the past enough to embrace a future? I would never ask you to forget Caroline, but I need to know there is room in your heart for me too." It was a fair question, and one that deserved an honest answer. Gideon thought about it, really thought about it, searching his heart for the truth. "I loved Caroline," he said finally. "I will always love her, and her memory will always be part of me. But loving her does not mean I cannot love again. If anything, she taught me how to love, and I think she would want me to use that gift rather than bury it. So yes, Julia, there is room in my heart for you. There is room for a future if you will share it with me." Tears spilled down Julia's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, I will." Gideon pulled her close, mindful of her healing shoulder, and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and grinning like fools. "I love you," Julia whispered. "I love you too," Gideon replied, the words feeling both foreign and perfectly natural on his tongue. They spent the rest of the day in a happy daze, stealing kisses and making plans. Julia would still need to go to Pine Ridge to secure her teaching position and arrange for her belongings to be transported to the ranch. But now, she would be going not as a solitary teacher, but as Gideon's intended, with plans to marry before the school year began. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and joy. Gideon accompanied Julia to Pine Ridge, where she met with the school board and secured her position. The town was small but growing, with perhaps 200 residents scattered throughout the surrounding area. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building that served children of all ages, and Julia fell in love with it immediately. They also visited the town's minister, Reverend Charles Harrison, a kind man in his 50s who agreed to marry them the following month. Julia purchased fabric for a wedding dress, simple but lovely, and Gideon commissioned the town's carpenter to build additional furniture for the cabin to accommodate Julia's things. The gossip about the cowboy and his mysterious bride to be spread through Pine Ridge like wildfire, but it was mostly good-natured. The town had few young women, and several of the local men had harbored hopes of courting the new teacher. But when they saw how happy Julia and Gideon were together, even the disappointed suitors could not help but wish them well. Martha Green, the owner of the town's general store and a formidable woman in her 60s, took Julia under her wing. "You will need friends here," she told Julia firmly. "Teaching can be lonely work, especially out here. You come to me if you need anything, you hear?" Julia gratefully accepted the friendship, and Martha proved invaluable in helping prepare for the wedding. She knew everyone in town and was not shy about telling them exactly what was needed. Within weeks, the entire community was invested in the upcoming celebration. Gideon found himself drawn into the preparations despite his natural inclination toward solitude. He cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, built Julia a proper wardrobe for her clothes, and even planted a small garden near the house at her request. Each task felt like a step toward a new life, leaving the shadow of grief further behind. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge, Julia asked about Caroline. "Tell me about her," she said gently. "I want to know the woman who captured your heart first." Gideon hesitated, then began to speak. He told Julia about meeting Caroline at a church social in Missouri, how her laugh had drawn him across the room like a magnet. He described their courtship, their wedding, their dreams of building a life in Montana. He spoke of Caroline's courage in facing the challenges of frontier life, her determination, her love. "She sounds wonderful," Julia said when he finished. "I wish I could have known her." "She would have liked you," Gideon said. "You have the same fire, the same refusal to give up. In some ways, you remind me of her. But you are also entirely your own person, and I love you for who you are, not as a replacement for who she was." Julia kissed him softly. "Thank you for trusting me with your memories. It means everything that you can share her with me. Thank you for understanding that loving you does not mean forgetting her." "Love is not a finite resource," Julia said wisely. "We do not love less because we have loved before. If anything, we love better because we know how precious it is." Her words resonated deeply with Gideon, and he pulled her close, overwhelmed with gratitude for this second chance at happiness. The day of their wedding dawned clear and beautiful, the late August sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. The ceremony was held at the small church in Pine Ridge, with half the town in attendance. Julia wore her new dress, a simple but elegant creation in pale blue that made her eyes shine like emeralds. Gideon wore his best suit, brushed clean and pressed with Julia's help. Reverend Harrison conducted the ceremony with warmth and sincerity, speaking of the sacred bond of marriage and the importance of love, trust, and partnership. When the time came for vows, Gideon's voice was strong and sure. "I, Gideon Zimmerman, take you, Julia Emerson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in joy and sorrow, in plenty and in want. I promise to build a life with you filled with hope and happiness." Julia's eyes shimmered with tears as she repeated her own vows, her voice trembling with emotion. "I, Julia Emerson, take you, Gideon Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through all of life's challenges. I promise to be your companion, your friend, and your love for all our days. I promise to help you embrace life fully and joyfully." When Reverend Harrison pronounced them husband and wife, the assembled crowd erupted in applause. Gideon kissed Julia thoroughly, not caring that everyone was watching, and she laughed against his lips, pure joy radiating from her. The town had organized a celebration after the ceremony, with food and music and dancing in the street. Gideon, who had not danced since Caroline's death, found himself pulled onto the makeshift dance floor by his new bride. At first, his movements were stiff and uncertain, but Julia's patience and encouragement soon had him relaxing into the rhythm. "You are a better dancer than you claimed," Julia teased as they spun around the floor. "I am motivated by an excellent partner," Gideon replied, pulling her closer. They stayed until sunset, accepting congratulations and well wishes from their new neighbors. Martha Green hugged Julia fiercely, whispering something in her ear that made Julia blush and laugh. Several of the local ranchers clapped Gideon on the back, welcoming him properly into the community for the first time. As the celebration wound down, Gideon and Julia rode back to the ranch together, Julia riding before Gideon on his mare, her back pressed against his chest. The summer evening was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and prairie grass. "Happy," Gideon murmured against Julia's hair. "Incredibly," she replied, her hands covering his where they rested around her waist. "I never imagined when I boarded that stagecoach that I would end up here, married to a wonderful man and beginning a new life. Fate works in mysterious ways." "Indeed it does, though I could have done without nearly dying first." Gideon tightened his arms around her. "I am grateful every day that I found you when I did. I cannot imagine my life without you now." "You will never have to," Julia promised. "We have a lifetime ahead of us." The cabin looked different when they arrived, transformed by Julia's touches over the past weeks from a bachelor's quarters to a real home. Curtains hung in the windows, flowers sat in a vase on the table, and small decorations Julia had made adorned the walls. But more than the physical changes, the cabin felt alive in a way it had not in years. That night, Gideon carried Julia over the threshold as tradition demanded, and they began their married life together with tenderness and joy. As they lay together afterward, Julia's head resting on Gideon's chest, he felt a contentment he had thought lost forever. "I love you, Mrs. Zimmerman," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too, Mr. Zimmerman," Julia replied sleepily. "Thank you for nursing me back to health and letting me do the same for your broken heart. Thank you for seeing past my grief to the man I could be again." They fell asleep tangled together, the past finally at peace and the future bright with possibility. The following weeks were a time of adjustment and discovery. Julia began her teaching duties, riding into Pine Ridge 3 days a week to instruct the town's children. She quickly won over even her most skeptical students with her patience, creativity, and genuine love of learning. Parents praised her methods and the children adored her. On the days Julia taught, Gideon found himself working with renewed energy. He expanded his herd, built a new barn, and even started construction on additions to the cabin. He wanted to give Julia everything, to build a home worthy of the life they were creating together. But it was the evenings he treasured most. Julia would return from town full of stories about her students, and they would sit together preparing supper, her lively chatter filling the cabin with warmth. After eating, they would often sit outside, watching the sunset and talking about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Julia said one evening about 2 months after their wedding. "At least 3, maybe 4. Gideon felt his heart swell at the thought. He and Caroline had wanted children too, but it had not happened before she died. The idea of having a family with Julia felt like another gift, another chance at the life he had thought lost. "I would like that," he said simply. "Though you must promise to still make time for me when we are surrounded by little ones demanding your attention." Julia laughed. "I promise. Besides, they will need their father's attention too. I expect you to be very involved in raising them. I would not have it any other way." As autumn painted the Montana landscape in golds and reds, Gideon found himself thinking often about how much his life had changed in just a few months. The grief that had consumed him for 3 years had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something gentler, a bittersweet memory rather than a constant ache. He could think of Caroline now with fondness rather than pain, grateful for the time they had shared rather than bitter about what had been taken away. Julia had been right. Loving her did not diminish what he had felt for Caroline. If anything, it honored it by proving that the love they had shared was strong enough to teach him how to love again. Winter arrived early that year, with the first snow falling in late October. Julia delighted in it, having grown up in Ohio where winters were harsh. She insisted on helping Gideon with the outdoor chores despite the cold, bundled in layers of wool and laughing as snowflakes caught in her hair. "You will freeze," Gideon scolded, though he could not help smiling at her enthusiasm. "I am perfectly warm," Julia insisted, throwing a snowball at him for emphasis. The snowball fight that ensued was brief but spirited, ending with both of them breathless and covered in snow. Gideon chased Julia back to the cabin, where they warmed themselves by the fire, shedding wet clothes and wrapping themselves in blankets. "Tell me again how you convinced me to marry you," Gideon teased. "I recall my life being much more orderly before you arrived." "Orderly and lonely," Julia countered. "Admit it, you love the chaos I bring." "I love you," Gideon corrected. "The chaos is simply part of the package." Julia kissed him soundly. "Lucky for you, I come with many other benefits that outweigh the chaos." As winter deepened, they settled into the comfortable rhythms of married life. Julia continued teaching, though less frequently as the weather made travel difficult. Gideon focused on maintaining the ranch and caring for the animals through the harsh winter months. They spent long evenings together by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply enjoying the comfortable silence of shared companionship. In December, Julia received word that the stagecoach robbers who had attacked her had been caught in Wyoming territory and were awaiting trial. The news brought a sense of closure, though Julia was surprised to find she felt little anger toward them anymore. "My life is so good now," she explained to Gideon. "If that had not happened, we might never have met. I would not change anything about how we came together, even the painful parts. Still, they hurt you and killed innocent people. They deserve justice. And they will receive it, but I cannot hold on to anger when I have so much to be grateful for." Her ability to forgive and move forward continued to amaze Gideon. It was one of the many things he loved about her, this capacity to choose joy over bitterness, hope over despair. Christmas that year was the happiest Gideon had experienced in years. He and Julia cut a small pine tree from the surrounding hills and decorated it with homemade ornaments and strings of popcorn. Martha Green and her husband Samuel came for Christmas dinner, along with several other families from Pine Ridge. The cabin was crowded and loud and wonderful. "This is what a home should be," Julia whispered to Gideon as they stood together watching their guests, "filled with friends and laughter and love." "You did this," Gideon said. "You brought life back to this place." "We did this," Julia corrected. "Together." As winter gave way to spring, Julia began to suspect she was pregnant. She waited several weeks to be certain before telling Gideon, wanting to be sure. When she finally shared the news one evening in early March, his reaction was everything she had hoped for: a baby. Gideon's face transformed with joy and wonder. "Truly, truly," Julia confirmed, laughing at his expression. "You are going to be a father." Gideon pulled her into his arms, gentle despite his excitement. "When?" "Late September, I think. Maybe early October. A fall baby." Gideon pressed a hand to Julia's still flat stomach, his expression awed. Our child, Julia agreed. Are you happy? Happy does not begin to describe it, Gideon said. I am overwhelmed, grateful, terrified, but mostly I am just so very happy. Julia laughed, tears spilling down her cheeks. Good, because I am feeling all of those things too. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, much to everyone's relief. Julia continued teaching through the spring, though she planned to take a break when the school year ended in June. Her students were thrilled by the news, and several of the little girls immediately began making gifts for the baby. Gideon became comically overprotective, constantly worrying that Julia was doing too much or not resting enough. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, understanding it came from a place of love and perhaps some fear left over from losing Caroline. I am healthy and strong, she reassured him repeatedly. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine. I know. But I cannot help worrying. You are the most precious thing in my life. The second most precious, Julia corrected, patting her growing belly. Soon this little one will share that honor. Summer arrived with its usual Montana glory, the land bursting with life and color. Julia's pregnancy was obvious now, and she had that radiant glow people always spoke of in expectant mothers. Gideon found her more beautiful than ever, especially when she would rest her hands on her belly and smile at the movements only she could feel. The baby is active today, she would report. I think we have a little dancer in here. In late July, Gideon felt the baby kick for the first time. He had placed his hand on Julia's stomach at her urging, and then suddenly there it was, a small but distinct push against his palm. He looked up at Julia with tears in his eyes, overwhelmed by the reality of the life they had created together. That is our child, he whispered. Our baby. Our baby, Julia confirmed, covering his hand with hers. As Julia's due date approached, preparations intensified. Martha Green came to stay at the ranch for the final weeks, ready to serve as midwife when the time came. She had helped deliver dozens of babies over her years in Montana and was confident and capable. Her presence eased both Julia and Gideon's nerves considerably. You are doing wonderfully, Martha assured Julia during one of her examinations. Everything looks perfect. This baby will arrive exactly when it is ready, and you will do just fine. The baby decided to arrive on a cool evening in late September, just as the aspen trees were beginning to turn gold. Julia's labor began slowly, giving Gideon time to fetch Martha from the guest cabin they had built partly for this purpose. Then it was a matter of waiting as Julia's contractions grew stronger and closer together. Gideon had delivered calves and foals, but this was entirely different. His wife's pain tore at him, making him feel helpless and useless. He held her hand, wiped her forehead, and whispered encouragement, but it felt inadequate. You are doing so well, he told Julia during a brief respite between contractions. You are the strongest person I know. Easy for you to say, Julia panted, but she managed a weak smile. You are not the one pushing a human being out of your body. If I could do it for you, I would. I know you would. Julia squeezed his hand. Thank you for being here. There is nowhere else I would be. The labor lasted through the night and into the early morning hours. Just as the first light of dawn began to creep through the cabin windows, their son was born, entering the world with a lusty cry that filled Gideon's heart to bursting. You have a boy, Martha announced, quickly cleaning the baby and wrapping him in a soft blanket before placing him in Julia's arms. A healthy, beautiful boy. Gideon stared at his son, unable to speak. The baby was tiny and red-faced and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and searching eyes. Julia was crying and laughing at the same time, cradling their child against her chest. Hello, little one, she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." "He is perfect," Gideon managed, his voice thick with emotion. "You are perfect. Thank you, Julia. Thank you for this gift." "We made him together," Julia said, looking up at Gideon with tears streaming down her face. "Our son." They named him Thomas after Julia's father, with the middle name Henry after Gideon's. Little Thomas Zimmerman proved to be a content baby, sleeping well and eating enthusiastically. Gideon was amazed by how quickly he fell in love with his son, how this tiny person had completely changed his priorities and perspective. "I would do anything for him," he told Julia one night as they watched their son sleep in the cradle Gideon had built. "Anything at all." "I know," Julia said softly. "That is what it means to be a parent. Complete, unconditional love." The first months of Thomas's life were exhausting but joyful. Julia proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving even during the sleepless nights and endless diaper changes. Gideon did his best to help, taking on more of the household duties so Julia could rest when the baby slept. The community rallied around them, bringing meals and gifts and offering advice. Martha visited regularly, checking on both Julia and Thomas and declaring them both thriving. The cabin that had once been Gideon's lonely refuge was now filled with the sounds of family life, with baby cries and lullabies and laughter. As Thomas grew from infant to baby to toddler, Julia returned to teaching part-time, bringing Thomas with her to the schoolhouse when he was small enough. The older students doted on him, and he grew up surrounded by books and learning and love. 2 years after Thomas was born, Julia gave birth to their daughter, whom they named Sarah Rose. She had Julia's green eyes and a temperament that was sunny and sweet from the start. Thomas was initially unsure about this new addition to the family, but Julia and Gideon helped him adjust, and soon he was protective and loving toward his baby sister. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. The ranch prospered, providing a comfortable living for the growing family. Julia continued teaching, instilling a love of learning in countless children over the years. Their home was always open to friends and neighbors, a center of warmth and hospitality in the community. As the children grew, Gideon taught them about the ranch, about the land, about the importance of hard work and integrity. Julia taught them to read and write, to think critically, to approach the world with curiosity and compassion. Together, they raised children who were confident, kind, and capable. The years passed quickly, marked by the milestones of family life. First steps and first words, school plays and birthday celebrations. The addition of 2 more children, another boy and girl, completing their family of 6. The ranch grew along with the family, expanding to accommodate their needs and ambitions. Through it all, the love between Gideon and Julia never wavered. If anything, it deepened with time, growing stronger through shared joys and challenges. They made it a point to steal moments alone together, to remember that they were partners and lovers as well as parents. One evening, nearly 20 years after Gideon had found Julia injured beneath the cottonwood tree, they sat together on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant colors. Their children were grown, or nearly so. Thomas was preparing to attend university back east. Sarah was engaged to a kind young man from Pine Ridge, and the 2 youngest were finishing their final years of schooling. "You ever think about that day?" Julia asked, her head resting on Gideon's shoulder. "The day you found me?" "Often," Gideon admitted. "I think about how close I came to riding a different section that morning, how easily I could have missed you entirely." "Fate," Julia said. "It had to be, the universe conspiring to bring us together. I am grateful for it, whatever it was." "You gave me back my life, Julia. You showed me how to live again, how to love again. Everything good in my life stems from that day." Julia lifted her head to look at him, her face still beautiful even with the lines that time had added. "You saved my life that day. But you have continued saving it every day since by being exactly the man you are, by loving me so completely, by building this beautiful life with me." Gideon kissed her, a sweet and tender gesture filled with decades of love and partnership. "I love you, Julia Zimmerman. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too, Gideon, always and forever." They sat together as the stars began to emerge, counting their blessings and marveling at the unexpected paths that had brought them to this moment. Two people who had been broken and lost, who had found each other at exactly the right time, who had built something beautiful and lasting from their shared pain and hope. Inside the house, they could hear their children's voices, laughing and talking as they prepared dinner. The sounds of family, of home, of love, everything they had hoped for and more. "Thank you," Gideon said quietly. "For what?" "For saying yes when I asked you to stay all those years ago, for taking a chance on a broken-hearted cowboy, for loving me and building this life with me, for everything." Julia smiled, that same radiant smile that had captured his heart so many years ago. "Thank you for finding me, for nursing me back to health, for letting me nurse your broken heart in return, for being brave enough to love again." "We were both brave," Gideon said. "Together." "Together," Julia agreed. As the last light faded from the sky and the Montana night settled around them, Gideon and Julia remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms. Behind them was a lifetime of memories, of joy and sorrow, of challenges overcome and dreams realized. Ahead were more years to cherish, grandchildren to spoil, new adventures to share. But in that moment, there was only the two of them, two hearts that had found healing in each other, two lives that had become so beautifully intertwined that neither could imagine ever having existed separately. The cowboy and the teacher, the man with the broken heart and the woman who had healed it, partners, lovers, friends. Together, they had built not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, carried forward by their children and their children's children. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, witnessing as they had witnessed countless love stories throughout history. But to Gideon and Julia, their love felt singular and special, a once-in-a-lifetime gift that neither took for granted. "Come," Julia said eventually, standing and extending her hand to Gideon. "Our children are waiting, and I suspect they have made something special for dinner." Gideon took her hand, rising to his feet with the slight stiffness that came with age but no loss of affection. "Lead the way, Mrs. Zimmerman." They walked into the house together, hand in hand, ready to enjoy an evening with the family they had created. The door closed behind them, light spilling from the windows into the Montana darkness, a beacon of warmth and love in the vast frontier night. Inside, the Zimmerman family gathered around the table, sharing food and stories and laughter. The children had indeed prepared something special, a feast to celebrate their parents' 20th anniversary of the day they met. There were toasts and reminiscences, tears and joy. "Tell us again how you met," Sarah begged, as she had countless times throughout her life. The story never got old, this tale of fate and fortune, of injury and healing, of two people finding each other in the vast wilderness. So Gideon told the story once more, with Julia adding her own details and corrections. The children listened with rapt attention, even though they had heard it dozens of times before, because it was not just a story. It was their origin, the beginning of their family, the reason they all existed. When the story ended, as it always did, with Gideon finding Julia beneath the cottonwood tree and bringing her home to heal, the family sat in satisfied silence for a moment. "That is quite a love story," Thomas said finally. his young man's voice filled with affection for his parents. "It is our love story," Julia corrected gently. "Everyone who truly loves has their own story, just as unique and special. What matters is not how the story begins, but how you choose to write it together. We have written a good story, haven't we?" Gideon asked, looking around at his family with pride and contentment. "The best story," Julia confirmed. "And it is not over yet. We have many more chapters to write together." The evening continued in warmth and companionship, a perfect encapsulation of the life Gideon and Julia had built. When the children finally departed to their own rooms, leaving their parents alone once more, Gideon and Julia prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of long marriage. "Happy?" Gideon asked, as he did so often. "Incredibly," Julia replied, as she always did. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Gideon said honestly. "You gave me a second chance at life, Julia. You gave me love and family and purpose. I am the luckiest man alive." "We are both lucky," Julia said. "Lucky to have found each other, lucky to have built this life, lucky in love." They climbed into bed, still holding hands as they had for 20 years. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow. Inside, two hearts beat in comfortable rhythm, synchronized by decades of love and partnership. "Good night, my love," Gideon whispered. "Good night," Julia replied. "I love you. I love you too." They drifted off to sleep together, content and fulfilled, their bodies pressed close in the darkness. And somewhere in the night, perhaps carried on that Montana wind, Caroline's spirit smiled, grateful that the man she had loved had found his way back to happiness, that he had not let her death define the rest of his life, but had instead honored their love by opening his heart again. The years continued their steady march forward. Thomas graduated from university and returned to help run the ranch, bringing with him new ideas and innovations. Sarah married her young man and settled nearby, soon blessing Gideon and Julia with their first grandchild, a beautiful baby girl they named Caroline Julia, honoring both the women who had meant so much to Gideon. When Julia held her namesake granddaughter for the first time, she looked up at Gideon with tears in her eyes. "This is right," she said. "That her memory lives on this way, that love continues." "Everything continues," Gideon agreed, his own eyes damp. "Love, life, hope. It all continues if we have the courage to let it." More grandchildren followed, filling the ranch with the sound of young voices and laughter once again. Gideon and Julia delighted in their role as grandparents, spoiling the little ones and passing on the stories and values they had worked so hard to instill in their own children. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the region. But Gideon and Julia never forgot where they came from, never took their good fortune for granted. They were generous with their neighbors, always ready to lend a hand or offer help to those in need. Their home remained a center of community, a place where everyone was welcome. Julia continued teaching until she was well into her 60s, finally retiring only when her joints made the ride into town too painful. But she never stopped teaching in the broader sense, always ready with wisdom or advice, always encouraging the young people around her to pursue knowledge and growth. Gideon worked the ranch until his body simply could not keep up with his will anymore. Even then, he found ways to contribute, overseeing operations and mentoring his children and grandchildren in the management of the land. The ranch was his legacy, but more than that, it was a testament to what could be built with love and determination. As they moved into their 70s, Gideon and Julia slowed down but never stopped. They spent long afternoons on their porch, watching their family grow and thrive. They took gentle rides around the property on calm horses, revisiting the places that held meaning for them. The cottonwood tree where Gideon had found Julia still stood, now ancient and gnarled, and they would sit beneath its shade and remember that fateful day. "I could have died there," Julia mused one afternoon. "But instead I found life. Real, full, beautiful life." "We both found life," Gideon said. "I was barely living before you arrived, just going through the motions, waiting for time to pass. You woke me up, reminded me what it meant to truly live." "We saved each other," Julia said simply. "That is what love does. It saves us from our loneliness, our grief, our small lives. It expands us and completes us." Gideon could only nod, too overcome with emotion to speak. After all these years, Julia could still move him to tears with her insight and wisdom. One spring morning, when they were both in their late 70s, Julia did not wake up. She died peacefully in her sleep, her hand still clasped in Gideon's, a gentle smile on her face. The doctor said it was her heart, simply worn out after a long and full life. The grief was immense, a tidal wave that threatened to drown Gideon just as it had after Caroline's death. But this time was different. This time, he was not alone. His children and grandchildren surrounded him, supporting him through the loss. And this time, instead of guilt, he felt only gratitude. Gratitude for the nearly 40 years they had shared, for the love they had built, for the life they had created together. At Julia's funeral, held in the same church where they had married, Gideon stood before the assembled community and spoke from his heart. "My wife taught me many things," he said, his voice strong despite his grief. "She taught me how to love again after I thought that capacity was lost forever. She taught me that honoring the past does not mean living in it. She taught me that courage is not the absence of fear but the choice to move forward despite it. Most importantly, she taught me that life is meant to be lived fully, with an open heart and willing spirit. I will miss her every moment of every day for whatever time I have left. But I will not dishonor her memory by giving in to despair. I will live, as she would want me to, surrounded by the family and love we built together." The community mourned with the Zimmerman family, but they also celebrated Julia's life and legacy. The children she had taught over the decades came to pay their respects, many now parents and grandparents themselves. They spoke of how she had inspired them, encouraged them, believed in them when no one else did. "Your mother changed my life," one former student told Sarah. "She made me believe I was smart enough to become a lawyer. Now I am one of the only attorneys in this part of Montana, and it is because she pushed me to pursue my dreams." Story after story reinforced what Gideon already knew: that Julia had touched countless lives, that her influence had rippled outward far beyond their family, that she had made the world a better place simply by being in it. After the funeral, Gideon returned to the ranch, to the home he and Julia had built. For the first time in 40 years, he was alone in the cabin at night. His children offered to stay, but he refused. He needed this time to process his grief, to say goodbye to his wife in his own way. He sat on the porch, the same porch where they had spent countless evenings together, and let the tears come. He cried for Julia, for the loss of her presence in his life. But he also cried with gratitude, thankful for the gift of their time together, for the love they had shared, for the life they had built. "Thank you," he whispered to the Montana night. "Thank you for finding me broken and loving me whole. Thank you for 40 years of happiness and partnership. Thank you for our children and grandchildren. Thank you for teaching me that hearts, even broken ones, can heal if given the chance. I love you, Julia. I will always love you." The wind whispered through the trees, and Gideon could almost hear Julia's voice in its sighing, telling him she loved him too, telling him to live fully for whatever time he had left, telling him that love never truly dies. Gideon lived for 3 more years after Julia's death, years filled with family and purpose. He was there for the birth of more great-grandchildren, for the weddings of his younger grandchildren, for the continued growth and prosperity of the ranch. He never remarried, content to carry his love for both Caroline and Julia with him for the rest of his days. On a cool autumn evening, very much like the evening when Thomas had been born, Gideon Zimmerman died peacefully in his sleep, in the same bed where he had found Julia sleeping so many times over the years. He was 81 years old and had lived a full, rich life. His family gathered to mourn and celebrate him, recognizing that while his death marked an end, it was not a tragedy. Gideon had lived well and loved deeply. He had overcome grief and opened his heart to love again. He had built a legacy that would endure for generations. They buried him next to Julia in the small cemetery overlooking the valley, with a simple stone that read, "Gideon Zimmerman, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. He lived fully and loved deeply." Next to it was Julia's stone, "Julia Zimmerman, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and teacher. She taught us all how to live." The ranch continued under the management of Thomas and his siblings, thriving and growing as new generations took up its stewardship. The cottonwood tree where Gideon had found Julia became a place of family legend, a reminder of how one chance encounter could change everything, of how love could heal even the deepest wounds. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the prairie grass, family members swore they could feel the presence of Gideon and Julia, still together, still watching over the land and family they had loved so well. It was romantic fancy, perhaps, but it brought comfort and connection, a sense that love truly did transcend death, that the bonds forged in life continued beyond it. The story of the cowboy and the teacher became family lore, passed down from generation to generation. It became a story about courage and second chances, about the power of love to heal and transform, about how one person's willingness to help a stranger could create ripples that extended far beyond a single life. Years turned into decades, decades into a century. The ranch evolved with the times, adapting to new technologies and methods while maintaining the core values Gideon and Julia had established. Their descendants spread across Montana and beyond, carrying with them the legacy of love and determination their ancestors had modeled. The cabin where it all began was eventually converted into a museum of sorts, maintained by the family as a reminder of their roots. Visitors could see the bed where Julia had recovered, the table where they had shared countless meals, the porch where they had watched sunsets together. Pictures lined the walls, documenting the life of Gideon and Julia and their growing family. But more than the physical artifacts, the spirit of what they had built endured. In the marriages of their descendants, in the way family members supported each other through hardship, in the generosity shown to neighbors and strangers alike, the influence of Gideon and Julia continued. Their love story became a North Star for the family, a reminder that life could surprise you in the best ways, that it was never too late for happiness, that opening your heart always carried risk, but the rewards were worth it. Young couples just starting out would visit the graves of Gideon and Julia, asking for their blessing and guidance. Parents would tell their children the story as a bedtime tale, using it to teach lessons about kindness, courage, and love. Grandpa Gideon was very sad, the story would go. He thought his heart was too broken to ever be happy again. But then he found Grandma Julia when she needed help, and by helping her, he helped himself too. They taught us that love can heal anything if we are brave enough to try. And so the legacy continued, generation after generation, a testament to what two people had built from pain and hope, from loss and discovery, from a chance encounter beneath a cottonwood tree on a Montana ranch in 1876. The story of Gideon and Julia, the cowboy and the teacher, became more than just family history. It became mythology, a touchstone, a reminder that the best things in life often come when we least expect them, that healing is always possible, and that love, true love, can transcend every obstacle if given the chance. Their love had started with an injury and a rescue, but it had grown into something far greater, something that enriched not just their own lives but the lives of everyone they touched. It proved that second chances exist, that broken hearts can heal, that choosing to love again after loss is not a betrayal but a triumph. And in the end, that was the greatest gift Gideon and Julia gave to each other and to all who came after them. The knowledge that love is always worth the risk, that life is meant to be lived fully, and that even in the wild and sometimes harsh frontier of Montana, beauty, healing, and happily ever after are always possible.